Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday's Tiny Bookstore Live. I'm Leah from the Tiny Bookstore, and this week we have a very special guest. Her name is Leah Henderson. She's the author of the new book, Daddy Speaks Love, and another one of the books that came out last year that I know that I positively adore is called A Day for Rememberin, and she's also the author of Together We March. And with that, I'd like to introduce Leah Henderson.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here with you all.
And again, thank you for joining us today. So, what I want to do is just get right into it with Daddy Speaks Love. Can you tell me about the title of the book?
Sure. So this project kind of came about because of a phone call. I was on the phone with Evie Lewis, the illustrator, and a dear friend, and we were talking, and he happened to mention that he just saw a clip of Gianna Floyd saying to President Biden, "My daddy changed the world." And so we started talking about the ways that dads affect their children's lives each and every day, and kind of the immense weight that is happening in this child's life with the absence of her father and the way that he was killed. And so we were talking about that, but then as someone who is very close to my own dad, I started talking about my father and the ways that he has shaped my life and guided my life. And EB, knowing my parents very well, he said to me, you need to sit down and go write what you're talking about. And so I sat down, and the first couple of days, I couldn't figure out my way in. And then I kind of came back to that idea of your dad. Think about the ways that your dad shapes your life and has shaped your life. And what does that look like? And I said, it looks like love. And so I kept talking to myself, and I kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And then one day it just came, and it was like, Daddy speaks love. And that's where I started, and that's kind of where I continued with the whole idea of the book, the ways in which he does speak love.
Which I think is very cool. I think that a lot of books that we see out there, they do touch upon parental relationships. But what I really like that what you got into is how it's not necessarily love as a word, but as a verb. If you can get into a little bit about that.
Sure. I think for me, as someone who has a dad who is very active in my life, in all parts of my life, in the most wonderful ways, and he is a true support system, but my mother as well. And so growing up, they always actively showed us what it is to love another human being, what it is to treat people fairly, what it is to see other people in their full form, not in just what you want them to be or you believe them to be or not be. And so when you think of life that way, you can't help but think about the active ways that somebody shows and exhibits how they feel and how they love. And so in this book, it was really important for me to showcase not just the word love, but other words that affect the way that a child kind of comes into this world and sees this world, and the ways in which a parent kind of touches on those in their life. So you have, it talks about justice and equality and comfort and fairness. And overall, the book is really about raising global citizens and just being very aware of the world around you and the place that you hold in it and the power that you hold in this world, even when we're very, very young.
And I really do love that because, again, it's a lot of times in trying to convey a lot of these complicated principles to kids, it's really difficult to know where to start. And I think that with the current situation, the pandemic, just I think kids have had just trying to explain what's going on with the world, with the racial justice movement that started picking up steam again in 2020. I really think that the way that you conveyed that was just really good. But I think that what I want to know is because I noticed that there's a little bit of a trend in your books. You don't necessarily talk down to kids. You're addressing very complicated concepts with them. And when you're doing that, this is going to sound like a really dumb question, but how do you do that?
No, it's not a dumb question at all. And I think, I don't actually really think about that part. What I think about is, what do I want them to know? right? What have I learned in the world at whatever point that was in my life? And how can I share that with them? Can I tell them about this little tidbit that I learned about in history? Or how is it that I can kind of showcase the ways in which people show each other love? And I think that there are multi layers to everything that happens. So a very young child hearing this book from a parent or a friend or an uncle or aunt or someone like that, when they're looking at the gorgeous illustrations that Evie created, they're seeing one layer of the story, right? An older child will see a little bit more within the story. An adult will see something else in the story altogether. And I think that that is the beauty of picture books. That's the beauty of storytelling. We all come with our own experience to the page, whatever we see on the page, and we interpret it in our own ways. And so for me, growing up, my parents never talked down to us at all. If we didn't understand it, we keep going until we understand what we need to understand. And so maybe that is speaking about it in a different way or coming at it from a different angle. But it is never about, you know what, you're not ready for this. We're going to give this to you in an age appropriate way, but we think that you are ready and are capable for what you will, understand from what we've said. And that's where the conversations start with us.
Absolutely. And I really do think that, again, with all of your books, they're really great starting off points for conversations between parents and kids. And I guess the big question that I have for you is, what is the takeaway that you're hoping that kids will get after they read Daddy Speaks Love?
So I think with Daddy Speaks Love, but with any of the books that I write, I'm very close to my family. So familial bonds and things like that are extremely important to me, but also just relationships and the friendships that we have and the people that are in our lives that help kind of buoy us up when we're not doing so well, and the people that we want to speak out for and with. And so when a child reads Daddy Speaks Love, I want them to think about how they speak love too, and I want them to think about the ways in which they can speak love for other people in their community, whether that is a neighbor or someone else that either looks like them, does not look like them, but somebody that might need to have that extra voice in the room of support. And so when I look at it, when I think about a book like Daddy Speaks Love or any of my books, it's always about the possibilities that are out there in the world for us. And I think sometimes we forget that the very young have something to say. They come out into this world screaming already. They got something to
Absolutely.
say, and they form it in different ways as they get older. And so, Daddy Speaks Love is definitely a book where I just want people to understand that yes, go speak your love.
And I do have a question about your background because,
Mhm.
again, the way that you're able to communicate so well with kids, what exactly is your background?
So, I mean, I think I am probably a certain age and never kind of got past that age. So we're just having a conversation that's pretty normal for me on an everyday. But so I come from a family that we do a lot of traveling. And I think for anyone who does a lot of traveling, you meet a lot of different people. You meet a lot of different people that don't necessarily speak the same language as you. You meet a lot of people that might not understand exactly what your worldview is about. You meet a lot of people that are just coming from very different angles in life. And I think when we talk, when you meet people in these different spaces, the conversation starts very simple, right? You start on this level to kind of see where the ground is, like where you all are, where the footing is, and where you start. And I think so when I approach stories, I think I approach stories in that way for myself, not even for my audience so much as like, okay, where am I starting? What's my footing in this story? Where are we going to launch off from? And so I think about that whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm talking to kids or adults. We all come from different perspectives. And when we step into the room, we have so much in our brains about what we already know, what we already think we know, what we are interested in hearing about, whether that can be expanded or not. Sometimes
Mhm.
some of us aren't open to the possibility of more. And so we shut down a lot quicker. So I think coming in as simple as possible and kind of as open as possible is just the best way to approach life, just in general.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, are you a historian?
I love history. I mean, I go down rabbit holes all the time. And if you looked at my bookshelves, you would know this. I have books that like from all different kinds of things. Anything will grab my attention. I'm there. One of the things with my family doing a lot of traveling when we were young, my parents were very much into making sure we went to places around the world that showcase different moments that have either happened in history,
Mhm.
people who have made profound impacts or small impacts in their, in their own communities. And so it was always a history lesson, right? When we went on trips, we didn't really go to the beach. If we went to the beach, it was because it was the southernmost tip of this country, or it was the this of this place. It
Right.
wasn't because we were going to go with our towels and sit on the beach. No, 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 no. We didn't have those types of vacations. We were always, you pretty much needed a vacation from our vacations. We had itineraries from my dad, and we would go and we would experience something, some moment, some beat in history that was transformative in some way. And so from that, I love stories, and I love the stories that come out of those moments. So I guess for me, history is kind of that natural place of where all of those things converge. So yeah, so even in my fiction, you'll see there's history in there because I can't help it.
Right. Because as I'm going through, I'm just sitting here wondering, I'm like, okay, like, was she a teacher? Is she a therapist? Historian? Lawyer?
I need one. No, so I teach in an MFA program now. So I teach creative writing. But literally growing up, we were always surrounded by kind of, you know, whether it was stories, or lots of storytellers in the family. So lots of, family stories, lots of kind of, let me tell you about this, or, the whole family huddled around to tell stories, or it was these trips that we took to these different places in the world. Or it was, just this idea of curiosity and wanting to know more about something. And then my parents being like, well, go get a book and find out what it is. And a lot of the times, some of the things that I was trying to find, I didn't often find in the books in the library. And so then that, as I got older and as I have gotten older, has been this need to, okay, those stories, those little moments that people aren't really getting to showcase or getting to see because they're not showcased in our textbooks or in some of the books that we have in the library. Why don't I explore those? How can I explore those? Whether it's in fiction or in nonfiction, that's something that I definitely try to do.
I think that's really awesome is that it sounds like you have a natural curiosity that was nurtured by your
Yeah,
parents because they took
absolutely.
everything and made a lesson out of it. And so I'm in awe of the fact that you just have natural curiosity and writing talent and are really doing a lot with that. So I think that's great. But while we're talking about history, I do want to talk about a day for remembering.
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
So, for everyone who doesn't know, A Day for Remembering is about the history of Memorial Day in the United States. And with that, oh, there it is. I'm going to go big screen so y'all can see it
Yeah.
nice and well. But if you can tell me about that book, because again, it's truly one of my favorite books from last year.
Thank you. So this was one of those projects. I was working on another book. I was actually working on this middle grade novel right here called The Magic in Changing Your Stars. And I was doing some research for that book. It's fiction, but I was doing some research, like I said, and I came upon this picture, and it was, and if you get the book, you'll see the image in the back of the book. But it is an image of about 200 Black children standing in an open field saluting a little boy, a little Black boy that's holding an American flag. And I was so curious about what this image was about. Like, I wanted to know what was going on. And and I was looking at the articles that it was associated with, but something in me said, well, that doesn't feel like it's the right thing, but I'm very curious. And I live in Washington, D.C., and so one of the luxuries is the Library of Congress is here. So I took a photocopy of the image over to the Library of Congress, and I was in there and I had it on the tables. And librarians are wonderful human beings. They are super human beings. And one of the librarians had said to me, you know, you can look in these catalogs over here and see if you can find any resources that can help connect you with this photograph. So while I'm doing that, some other librarians came in, and one of them looks at the desk, and she sees the image and she says, do you know where this photo is from? To another librarian. And so my ears perk up. And so they basically knew exactly where it was. One of them knew exactly where it was from. So it's of a flag day that was later in the 1800s. But what the image is linked to on the internet is the first Memorial Day. And so while that image didn't have anything to do with that day, for me, it brought me into this moment where I had never heard of 10,000 newly freed African American, men, women, and children, led by 3,000 African American children going to decorate the graves of fallen Union soldiers. I'm like, wait a second, what? When did this happen? There were newspaper articles about it, but it was kind of tamped down as the history books were written, right? But for me, it was one of those moments where I said, this needs to be in a book. I don't know how I'm going to make it into a book, especially because it is about, there was a jockey race course in Charleston, South Carolina in 1865, where Union soldiers were kept in the open fields. And it was a prison. And unfortunately, a number of them, over 250 of them, died from exposure there. And so they were put into a mass grave. And so as I'm reading all of this, I'm thinking, but Leah, you want to make this into a picture book? Like, what? Come on now. We got to figure this out. But I was so fascinated by this history, especially because it is surrounding one of our largest holidays, and it was something that is never spoken about. We hear about some of the other incidents where they credit the first Memorial Day, and it might have been just a couple of people decorating graves of both Confederate and Union soldiers, or it might have been a town that had an event. But these dated after this particular event. So I started there and just continued to try to figure out my way into the story. And I decided to create a little character named Eli that was going to bring you into this world and was going to tell the story for you.
And again, like I think that the timing of this particular interview, I think, is perfect. As far as Black History Month, what's going on as far as erasing and silencing history, because this is all kind of part of the same trend where we're not necessarily paying attention to Black contributions to our history. And a lot of people just aren't aware of the fact that the first official Memorial Day was something that was done by Black people.
Yeah, and
And
so many, not a small group, like
mhm,
so many. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and for that to just literally be ignored for hundreds of years. And I believe like last year that there was someone who was speaking out at a Memorial Day, and yes, they cut his mic.
Turned his microphone off as soon as he started talking about this event.
Yep, and
Like,
that was wild, and I saw that, I'm just like, "Here, I'm looking at your picture book, and you're trying to, educate kids on this while at the same time adults are silencing someone who's trying to share this history." So, if you can speak on that a little bit.
sure. I think, one of the things that is an honor about writing for children is we're getting them at this place where I remember when I was a kid and we would go on these trips, and then I'd go back to school and we'd open the book and they'd be telling us about a moment. And I'd be like, wait a second, what about the other people that were there?
Mm,
There were some other things happening at that time. Why is that nowhere in this book? And I remember feeling it was a twofold feeling, because part of me was frustrated, but that my frustration came from having the knowledge, right? But then there was another part of me that was deeply saddened that this knowledge was not available to my peers in the class. Because when you understand the complexity of the different groups and communities that come together to create change in this world, you really understand the power that we hold when we come together. And when you don't showcase that, when you only showcase one, story, one representation of an event, we are all losing out. right? We are all missing something when we don't know the contributions that other communities have made in a moment. And so I just remember thinking when I was young, I was not, my brother, one of my brothers was a lot more self-assured in raising his hand and being like, you know what, this history book is flawed. It doesn't have everything in it. And challenging the teacher to be like, you know what, this is what happened. I know this says this, but let me let you in on a little something. And sometimes the teachers would be like, no, that's not true. And then my brother would have to be like, look, my family went there. I stood on this place. I did this thing. I heard this thing. I read this diary or whatever, and had to kind of push back. And I didn't do that. But part of me really wishes that I had. But now is my opportunity to kind of sit down at my desk and tell that other part of history that doesn't often get shown and doesn't often get highlighted. And so my hope in doing that is because I'm coming to that audience when they're young, that you remember as you get older. No, 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 no. Everything I'm seeing out here is just not the only way that it is. And to kind of challenge what you're seeing. And I always say to my students, look outside the frame. What is outside the frame of the image that this person has decided to paint, to photograph, to tell the story of? What's to the left, what's to the right? There are communities that are standing there and they were affected, and they could have also been a part of the change that was happening. And you need to know about that, and you need to question why they're not there, why their voices aren't heard. So that's something that's really, really, really important to me when I write.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I just love the fact that you're taking something that is so important, a part of history that's being ignored, and making it accessible to all kids.
Yeah.
So your book is definitely at the top of our list of recommendations for history for kids. And if you don't have it, y'all, you should go pick it up. Again, that's A Day for Remembering. Grab it. Now, to transition to something else, Together We March.
I do want to say about A Day for Remembering, because it was illustrated by the wonderful Floyd Cooper, who passed away. And so this one is near and dear for that reason, that I got to do a book with my buddy.
And I think that's, may he rest in peace.
Yeah.
And it's, again, absolutely gorgeous work, because I love when you're looking at picture books where you can actually feel something in the way that the drawing is done. And I think that the way that it complements your writing so beautifully.
Yeah. I mean, there are some, there are really some beautiful spreads in here. Let me go this way. Yeah, there are some gorgeous spreads that Floyd did in this book.
Yes.
Really beautiful. So sorry, I just wanted to say that.
No problem. Like, I'm always glad to give credit where it is due, and it's certainly due there.
Yeah.
But with Together We March, if you can tell us a bit about that book.
Sure. So, living in DC, lots of marches are happening all the time. And back in 2017, it felt like there was a lot going on in the street. There were lots of signs, and I am always reading the signs. And I'm always curious to know what people have taken the time to, get out their paint or get out their markers and put on those signs. And so I remember thinking about that when I was walking out my door. I was like, oh, I wonder what this march is about or that march is about. Because, some of them are small, some of them are large. You never know. But then a few months later, I was sitting at my computer and I was on Google, and the Google Doodle was of the 1917 silent parade that happened in New York City, where 10,000 African Americans walked in complete silence down Fifth Avenue. And I had heard about this event before. But one thing I noticed was in a lot of the comments in lots of different places, people were saying, how come I've never heard of this? I don't know anything about this. And some were challenging, like, what else don't I know? And it got me thinking about just marches in general, and some that I am well aware of, and many of us are well aware of. But I was like, what other marches have happened, and what effects have they had, whether it is on a large scale or a small scale? Because that 1917 silent parade was the beginning of African Americans taking to the streets. Right. It was the beginning of our mass protest movements that happened during the civil rights movement. It was that precursor to that. And so I was just thinking about what other things have come before that really spoke to people because, a lot of the marches now where young people are talking, they're talking about being influenced by some of the marches from the civil rights movement and different things like that. And so you're wondering, okay, where can I pinpoint? Where can I connect the dots? So Together We March is a book about 25 protest movements in history. And they cover not just protests in the United States, but they cover protests in different parts of the world. And it starts with the Children's March, the March of the Mill Children in 1903. And we end with the marches for George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And so it covers everything from the Capitol Crawl, which was about the Americans with Disabilities Act, trying to get that passed. Then I have like the Million Puppet March in here, where people were trying to protest against getting rid of PBS and public radio and public TV. I have, the Salt March. And so I have just a number of different marches that have happened. But one of the things for me that was just so important to look at was not the people that we always hear about, right? The heroes of a movement that are showcased large and tall on the stage, but the people who were working behind the scenes to make these things happen, the people who were living in their everyday lives and were courageous and said, I'm going to do this, even if I've never marched before, even if I've never spoken out before, And so that was fascinating to me. It was fascinating to see which movements and which moments made somebody get up off their couch and say, no, 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 not today. I'm not sitting here today. I'm going out in the street and I'm going to protest. And we saw that so much during the 2020 summer as well with young people. And so I just really wanted to highlight that and kind of explore it for myself because I was very curious. So there was a lot of research involved on that one. Lots and lots and lots.
Yes. And I think that it's absolutely worth it because you're bringing history to life, and it's part of history that is almost universally ignored. The story that we hear is, there was slavery and then that was over. And then
Yeah,
the civil rights movement happened and that was over. And now equality.
yeah,
And just
yeah,
really getting into that history of people standing up and being heard.
yes.
I think that that's very important. And again, doing it in a way that's accessible for kids, you can't beat that. You really can't.
And it's people from all walks of life, and a lot of the things that they're protesting for and against are the same. Over and over again, they're speaking about the same things. And so it was really important for me to kind of highlight that as well. Like if we kind of came together on all of these points, you know what I mean? We would be a stronger force than those against them. So yeah, so that was very important for me to kind of discover for myself and explore as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't help but miss that there seems to be a thread about, togetherness, relationships, people working together through your books, and it's a wonderful example for kids and just absolutely wonderful work.
Thank
So,
you.
I
Thank
am
you.
wondering, do you have anything else coming up in the pipeline?
Sure. So I am someone who is always in my head, always got something going on in my brain. I do have a book that comes out in the spring. It hasn't been announced yet, but it is a story. It's a fable, and I heard it when I was young, and I remember, different points in your life where you don't think that your efforts matter, and that what you are doing is on such a small scale that it doesn't make a difference. And I was going through some stuff on just in that writing space. Sometimes writing is hard, and you're just kind of, why am I doing this when it's such a small, I'm like this small little dot in the universe. And so you have these moments. And so in one of those moments, just kind of thinking about my parents who are always kind of like, no, we refocus that thinking and think about that moment and think about what you could say about your efforts in that moment. And I thought back on this fable. And so the book I have next year coming out next year is about one of those moments where I needed to be reminded of that story. So that comes out, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm starting to see the sketches from the illustrator. So that's wonderful. I also have a couple of short stories and some anthologies that are coming out. A sports anthology. I'm a big rower. I did crew for a number of years. Really competitive athlete. And so I have a story about crew and an upcoming sports anthology. And then I'm also in an anthology called Calling the Moon, where it's BIPOC creatives have all shared stories about girlhood and menstruation. And then I have another book called Your Voice, Your Vote, which is about a little girl, her grandmother and her mother going to vote, and the little girl learning about the history of Blacks and voting, and just the history of voting in general, and the importance of casting our vote and using our voices. And so then I have a couple other things in the pipeline, but those are the ones that are kind of in some form of I've seen some final products.
But awesome. And I look forward to every single one of them because, again, I think that encouraging kids to learn about history and togetherness and what we can do as a group and motivation, it's a really good thing in finding resources that are accessible but don't talk down to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
There aren't a lot out there, and it's something I think that you do very well.
Thank you, thank you. I
And
try. It's one of those things you just try, right? You
yes,
try.
and I think that you've succeeded.
Thank
But
you.
for anyone who's interested in picking up the books, I checked. If you're in the Pittsburgh area, Allegheny County, it's available at your local library. If you'd like to purchase it, the
Mm,
links are in the description below. And I'd like to thank you again, Leah Henderson, for joining us with the Tiny Bookstore and with your other books that are coming out. We will be keeping an eye out for it, and we hope that you can join us again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend a little time with you all.
We loved it.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
All right. I enjoyed that conversation. Like I said, I really do enjoy Leah's work. It's really wonderful stuff. And if you have questions about how do you introduce your kids to Black history, this is a good place to start. Leah Henderson, Leah Henderson. Start with those books because it really is an age appropriate way of opening the door to getting your kids to understand what Black history is. Because again, it's American history. We're not getting the full story. And the best way to get the newest generation to understand that stuff is to give them books that really explain it well. But that is all I have for this week's Tiny Bookstore Live. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank Leah Henderson for being our guest, and I will see you next week.